Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the dynamic button training. In this training, we've got a lot of ideas on how to show text and printers within the button. We're going to show you how to be able to control the number of copies dynamically through a button. Also going to be able to change the look and feel of buttons simply by hovering over a drop-down list and then clicking is going to change those buttons. We can also show buttons based on a field type. For example, this one's only going to show up in date type fields. Also with calendar, it's going to be a great training. Let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining us today. We've got a lot to show you. In fact, this particular training is also known as the mobile sales order. Mobile sales order, that's where we actually created this in a prior video. Let's just take a look at that quickly in case you haven't seen that. It's located here in mobile sales order. I'll include the links down below. I show you how to create this amazing sales order with multiple items, customers, product information. It's a great training, and I'll include that here. It was called How to Create a Mobile App from Any Excel Sheet. So that's a full sales order application. So today we're going to be focusing on the dynamic buttons as part of that. So keep that in mind if you want to learn about that training. I'll include the links down below. Because today we've got a lot to cover. We're going to show you how to create multiple copies just by selecting a specific up or down arrow and creating the text within that button and controlling the number of copies very easily. We're also going to show you how to dynamically generate a list of your active printers on your computer and creating and selecting a specific printer and being able to print to that. So for example, if I were to select the Snagit printer here and clicking the print button, it's going to print automatically to that printer. So we've got that covered right here. All right, so we've got that. We also have the ability to change the theme of all the buttons simply by highlighting or hovering over a specific button. And if we just hover, it's not going to make those changes. However, if we select a specific color, that's going to keep those changes permanent. So we're going to have to show you how to do those two things with the hover button and changing the theme on all the buttons. And of course, we're going to show you how to use this amazing calendar feature. Sometimes you want to change a date, but you don't want to always use the calendar, and you want to have a nice little pop-up calendar. Now, I've shown you this shape-based calendar before in prior videos, and I'll include some links down in case you want to see how to create that. But today we're going to focus on the ability to create an icon, have that icon appear only on cells formatted on date. So it's a really powerful feature and very easy to program. For example, there's a no, let's take a look. There's no date field. This is a, drop this down. This is a general field in M5. But if we change that to date, and we go out of it and come back into it, it's going to automatically show that calendar. So you see how easily that is to change that just on the date format. If we change it back to general, go back out and back in, nothing will appear. So it's really dynamic. Again, dynamic buttons is what we're focusing on here. Buttons that will do things appear only under certain conditions and only change colors based on certain conditions. Let's go back to the nice blue. I like that. We can also have the ability to go turquoise if you like that and change it back. Okay, so it's really a great feature. We've got so much to cover. I want to get it all in our training today, so let's get started right away. Now, the first thing you'll notice is we've got a drop-down list. Now, the drop-down list is based on a specific button here. So if we click on that, we see a drop-down list. Now, how do we create that? Well, in actuality, this is a drop-down, a dynamic drop down field based on the data validation in E3. So if we were to move this button a little bit away, and we're going to change this font color, I've hidden it with the font color saved in the background. If we change it back, we're going to see that this is just your standard average drop down list, but we've hidden it. Now what I want to do is I want to control this opening up. How do we control this opening up? Well, if we see here, we control this data validation, but I'm jumping ahead. Let's just go right back to see how we created this dynamic. Again, back into the data field, data validation. I've got a data validation called printer list. So if we hide over here, we'll see it's a printer list. That's based on some cells in columns A and B. So let's unhide. As we know, we always put our data here, and we'll see that we have a list of printers here. A list of printers. This is a dynamic list. That means as this list grows, so does that range. So when we go back into the formulas, name manager, and we look under printer list, we tab over, we'll see that this is an offset using count A. What does offset count A does? It allows us to increase the named range, the contents of that name range as the list increases or reduces. So what I want to do is I want to generate an automatic list of that using VBA. So if we close that out, and we delete all of the items, I want to create a macro that's going to generate those. So I've done just that. Now they're all gone. I've deleted them. But let's take a look into the developers and see just how we generate that list. And so that's our list of printers. So into the developers, if you don't have the developers tab open, of course, you can find that located in the options, and then you'll click the customize ribbon and make sure you've clicked the developers. Alt F11 is the shortcut that'll get you there into the VBA. We've got some button macros now. And if we take a look at these button macros, we've got a few of them here. What I'm focused on here is the update printer list. Now I didn't assign this to any button, but you could. In other words, if we look back into Sail, there's no button associated with this because I think it's just going to run one time, but you probably will want to assign it to a button. I did not. So let's take a look at that macro. So basically we're going to have the printer number. And what we want to do is we want to loop through all of the active printers in your specific computer. Now I know this works on PC. I have not tested it on a Mac, so if you do have a specific Mac code, just share that with me or share that in our group and we'll make sure to update that so this will work on a PC. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to loop through all the printers. So we're going to dimension row number and printer number as long. We can actually update this to some a little bit more as long, and then we'll dimension the printer as long. So now we've dimensioned them both as long and separate, which is kind of a better way to do that. Two features. We're going to mention the worksheet network and the printer's objects. Okay, so I want both of those as objects. That's important. I also want to clear any existing printers that might have previously been there between A25 and A50. So I want to clear, just as I did here, starting in A25. And we're going to go all the way down to A50 and just clear out those any printers that might have been there already. We want to clear those out so that we can refresh our list. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to set the row number at 25. That is the initial row or the first number in column A. Row number 25. That's where our first printer is going to go, and then we're going to increase the row number as we list. So now we're going to give us our work, set our network to view the drives. So we're going to define that into a variable here, wscript network. So wscript network is going to run that little script through our drives. And we're going to set the printers here to the script printers enumber. We're going to print all the printer connections under enum printer connections, and that's going to set all the printers for the computer. So we want to loop through those. So for each, now we're going to go over for each, basically for each printer number that has been assigned a number through all the printers. This will count all the printers that you have in your computer, starting at 0, going all the way count -1. We want to go up to the last one, and we're going to step 2. Why are we step 2? Because it's based on the number of printers. Each printer is assigned to 2, so it skips 2. We want to skip 2 because there's 2 for every printer assigned. And now the printer number, so once we have the printer, once we go through each printer, we're going to set the printer item to printer number 1 plus 1. This will get the name of the printer based on the printer number. So we have the printer number, we're looping through the printer numbers, but I want to know the name, the item of whatever the printer number is. That item is going to give us our name. Once we have the name of that printer, we're going to place it. We're going to place it in column A and the row number. That's going to place it in A, and that's going to place the printer name right here. The printer name is what we've defined right here. We're going to place that in A. Now all we need to do is increase the row numbers, increase the row. Why do we do that? Well, we're starting at 25, so for everyone, then 26, 27, 28. So as we get those names from the printer drivers and bring them down here, it's going to post them down, down, down. So we need to increase the row number 1, add 1 for the next row in column A. So when we run this, and I'm going to run this macro, it's going to get all of our printers, going to list them out right here. So all the printers that I have are here, and I've got a total of 12 printers associated. Now, once we have those lists, we're going to use the dynamic named range. Let's look at that again. Formula, name manager. I've created a dynamic name range, and I've called it printer list. Here's the printer list right here. And I've given it a formula that is going to be connected to that named range. This is a dynamic named range using offset. Why do we do that? Because we don't know how many. It could be 12, it could be 5, it could be 20. So we don't know how many printers. So that means we need to make sure that there's a named range that's going to encompass all of the printers. So this offset formula will do it. It's going to start in 25, and then how many is it going to run for? It's going to run for however many it counts between A25 and A50. It's going to count all of the rows with text, and then that's going to be our last column, our last row there. So we're going to be able, and of course the column is just one. So this particular formula, offset sales orders, count A, will give us the total number of printers in a dynamic named range. That way, when we create a specific data validation here, we're going to take that data validation and we're going to be able to put it into that here into data validation under printer list, so that automatically when we click this drop down list, we know that it's going to open up the list. Okay, great. So we understand the data validation. We understand how we created the printers, but when we click this button, how do we get this list to open? Well, there's a shortcut. If we click in here, we have learned perhaps in the past, we know that Alt down arrow will open the list. Alt down arrow opens the list. Let's do that again. Alt down arrow will open list. So if I know that Alt down arrow opens the list, I can run a macro using send keys to do just that. So when I click here, the first thing I want to do is select inside the cell. So for example, let's say I've selected another cell. So the first thing I want to do within the macro is select this cell. The next thing I want to do in the macro is go Alt down arrow, because that's the action that I want to take. So we can do that with the macro. So when we click here, select cell, and then Alt down arrow will open it. Then when I select something, I want to change the text in here. Okay, one thing at a time. Let's go ahead and take a look at the macro that's going to open this up for us. Open that up. So back into the developers, into the Visual Basic, Alt F11, I'll give you there. And what I want to do now is I want to create an open printer list. This is the specific macro that I have running. How do we know that? Well, when we right click on this little triangle here, actually not the entire shape, but this little triangle, right click, we click assign macro, we see that there's a macro called open printer list, open printer list. And we edit that, we're going to find out that it's open printer list right here. This is the macro we're going to be focusing on. Now we're using send keys. Now send keys is relatively simple, but there's a few issues in Excel. If you ever notice when you use send keys, sometimes the number lock gets unlocked, on your keyboard. It's kind of a strange bug. So to get around that, and is a great way to do that using this script as an object. So I found some great solution on here. So we're going to, again, create another script object, a shell here. And then what we'll do is we'll set it to the create object shell. And what that's going to do is really avoid that number lock issues. So again, the first thing I want to do is select E3 on sheet 1. Remember, we want to do that. And the next thing I want to do is using the send keys. In fact, this time we're going to use this shell here, send keys, and then we're going to use Alt. This percentage is the shortcut for Alt, and then the down arrow. So sending the Alt down arrow, and then we're going to do a small wait now, and that helps. Otherwise, it could just close up very quick. So this small delay helps it a lot. And so that's all we need to do that. So then, now that we've hidden it, right? So once we hide it, we bring it down here. We kind of just hide it like that. Now it gives us the effect that we're actually lowering it. So now it seems like it's a drop down list based on that. In fact, we want to raise it. Kind of want to hide that. I kind of want to hide that cell selection completely. So let's move it up a little bit, something like that. So you might want to increase it. So this gives us the impression that we're actually giving a drop down from the button, but it's actually a drop down from the cell behind it. It's kind of a little trick there. And then, okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to, when I select something, I want it to change the text in the button. So how do we do that? So when I change it, automatically it happens. Well, we know already that E3 is taking the value, right? We know E3 is taking the value. So if we know the value and we also know the text in here, we want to combine a certain amount of text, and we want to combine this to make up the text within that button. So what we want to do is we want to link that button to a cell. And then that cell, we can use different variables to combine to create the text. So when we right click on here, we'll see that this is connected to B21. Now I right click the shape itself. Remember, this is a group. It's made up of a lot of different specific shapes, but I only am concerned about this particular shape, this rounded rectangle here. That's the only shape that I'm focused on here. So B21 is connected to. So the text of this specific button is getting its value from B21. So let's look at cell B21 and see how that happens. So we'll scroll down. Now B21 is equal to a combination of things. Equal to, and then I just added a spacer, and that's the spacer for the icon, right? I need a space for this icon here because we're going to put that icon. So it's print, then a space, and B20. What is B20? B20 is the number of print copies. We're going to go over that next. So that is where the number of the copies to print is going to be located in B20, and then more spaces because I need to make room for this up and down arrow here to control the number of copies. Copies to, right? Print copies to, and then what? E3. We know E3 contains our printer, so just a combination of variables along with text will make up what the button should say, the text within that button. So all we have, so now as we increase this here, let's bring this button back down where it belongs, and then we can see if as we add increase, all we're doing is changing this, right? It changes B20, of course, a macro does that. And it also changes the text because it gets this number from B20. So it's a combination of two variables. That's how we can control it. And of course, if we change the printer, it's going to automatically change in the specific button here. Just like that. All right, so now we've seen it. So let's go back into this button and let's see how we actually control the numbers. And this is a very, very simple macro. What I want to do is assign two macros, two different macros. One increases this number and one decreases this number. And I just want to make sure that we don't allow the users to go below 1. So if they do go below 1, we'll set up a message box that says print quantity must be 1 or above. So how do we do that? So let's take a look. If we click on here, specific triangle, right click that, and we click assign macro, we'll see that this is called print number increase. And if we edit that, we're going to go also into the button macros, and we see we have two macros here, one called print number increase and print number decrease. Now the print number increase is very simple. Sheet 1 B20 value equals whatever its current value is plus 1. The decrease slightly different, but we just need to put in a caveat here to see if it's currently 1, then of course we're going to have a message box, the print quantity must be 1 or above, and then exit, there's nothing else to do. Of course, if it's already greater than 1, then we can reduce B20 by 1, by whatever the value is and by 1. So that's all that does. So it's very easy. Now, how do we get it to print to that? So let's go ahead. We've covered the update printer list. We've covered printer list. And now we want to print the actual order, right? When you click on this specific button, actually, when you click on, remember, it's not a group. We don't want to assign a macro to this group. Be very, very important. Why not? Because items within this group have different macros. This upper triangle has a different macro. This lower triangle has a different macro. This drop-down triangle has a different macro. So we really only want to assign a macro to this button here and probably this printer icon here. Those are the two we want to really assign. So when you click on it, hold the control, hold it down, click it one more time, what you want to assign your macro, and then click the icon. These are the two items we want to assign our macro to. So when we right click assign macro, we'll see that it's print order. Print order is the macro we are assigned to. Edit that and we go into print order also in the button macros. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to print. I'm going to start it with C. In fact, we can bring this over. It's going to be a larger column. C. And then what I want to do is all the way through L. So I want to print these columns as well. And I want to start it off probably at D3 because I want to include this order date. So D3 would be the first cell, and the last cell is dynamic, right? It's going to be based on how many products we have. So the last row is dynamic. So we do need to run a check to see this last specific row, and that's the one we're going to create a dynamic range in the print. So let's do that within the macro. So we're going to define the print range as a range because it's going to be dynamic. The last row is long because we need to determine the print copies is long. And the selected printer as a string, so we want to know the printer. So we have to define all those. The last row, of course, is going to be equal to D with sheet 1. We're only focused on sheet 1 here. Range D99 and XLab. This is going to get us the last product row. Okay, so we have last product row. Then we have the selected printer. We know that's in B22. Why is it in B22? Let me show you. Because when we changed this here, we also know that this is equal to E3. I just made it. We could also use E3 as well. So E3 is fine, but I wanted all the variables here. So I just made this equal to E3 so that we also have the printer name located in B22. So we have that there. And now the print copies we know is in B20, the number of copies to print. Now we're going to determine the last row. If the last row is less than 20, then equals 20. We need to make sure that we have a minimum number of last row. And in this case, we're going to use 20 just so that the first row, okay, just in case there's no data in there, we don't want an issue with that. We want to set the print range to a minimum number of rows. Okay, now we're ready to set the print range. We know it's going to start in D3. That's the first row, first column. And then the last column and last row would be K. In fact, we could probably make it L2 as well, but we could make it L to give it a little bit more space, but that depends on you. You can change this as you need it. Okay, now that we have the print range, because we know it's based on this last row, what we need to do is we need to set the print area. What is that? Well, that's basically the same thing as going in page layout, print area, set print area. It's the same thing as doing just that. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it into VBA. And now we need to set the page setup print area here. And equals basically what is the print range, the address of the print range. So this is automatically sets the print area to the address of this specific print range. In this case, of course, it's D3 through L, in this case 27, which is the last row. So that's set, and now we're ready to print. Now we've defined the print range. Now we need to just create a print. I've got on it resume next in case the user cancels out of a process or something. Print out, what are we going to print out? Well, let's take a look at all the variables in the printout. The first one is from 1 to 1. We just want one page. We're going to print copies. The next one is print copies. We want to print the number. That's a variable we've defined. Do we want to print preview? That's false. What about what printer do we want to set? I want to set it to the selected printer. And of course, that's the variable that we've defined here in B22. And then the next step, print to file. In this case, we're not printing to file. We may want to collate, so we can true or false on that. And then next step, we don't want to print to file. We don't have a print to file name, no name on that. And I don't want to ignore the print areas because we've set the print areas. So I want to make sure not to ignore them because we want specific print areas. So that's it. So now when we just run the printer area, let's bring this copy down to 1. And now let's change it to my Snagit editor because that's probably the fastest one that I can show you. So when we change it back to the Snagit and I click print, it's going to print automatically to that Snagit just like that. And it's probably going to be maximized. It's kind of big, but let's bring it down to show you what that looks like. And so you can see how that looks on the printed. And of course, you can set the print areas and you can make your own different printer, but basically it's going to print that entire order right here based on the information. And you see how it's Snagit 9, you see how that printer, you probably don't want to see that. So of course in our cases we just go to E3, well currently it's E3, and then just change that font to the blue, which is the same as the background. Now it won't show up. Alright, so we've covered exactly how we show and create printers: dynamic printer number, dynamic printer name, and we create a dynamic drop-down list of all the printers in your computer. Now let's focus on how we change the themes. Now we're going to go over dynamic printer as far as the theme is concerned, and that would be the colors associated with this. And if we hover over specific buttons, automatically going to change all those buttons. So how did we do this? How did we create this amazing dynamic drop-down list? Well, let me show you. Now, as we know, on standard buttons, there's no hover. In other words, when I hover over a standard, there's no programmable way I can run a macro. The only way we can run a macro on really hover is through an ActiveX component. So let's go and take a look at those ActiveX components. And we've covered this slightly before, but not in this manner. So I wanted to go over that with you and see how we did that. So there's a bunch of things going on at the same time. We have shapes, we have ActiveX components, we have hover, we have exit. So that means when the user exits, we want something to happen. You see, look, all I'm doing is moving my cursor over outside, and I want something to happen. So we've got a lot of things going on. We've got things going on hover as we hover over this. So there's a lot of different things. Let's show you how we did that. Into the developers, what I want to do is I want to go into the design mode. And once we're in the design mode, it's going to give us the ability to actually control and see these. Let's go back into the design mode. Now that we have the hover part, once you're in the design mode, you can actually take a look at these. And what is the ActiveX? What am I using here? Well, this is different shapes. If we look into the properties and I click on, this is a group now. I've given this group called theme menu, and this group is made up a lot of different components. Let's take a look at those components and go into the shape selection pane and see all those components, because that's the best way to see it. So if we look here and we see what theme, we'll look at theme menu. Okay, this is the components that are making up. I've got a hover. What is a hover? I've got a hover blue. I've got a hover shape called hover. And what is this? So if we take a look at that and we click into the properties now, you'll see that this is an ActiveX label. How do we create an ActiveX label? Well, into the insert, ActiveX, here is label right here. This is how we create an ActiveX label. So just clicking on here, it's going to create an ActiveX label. Why do we need these? Because ActiveX label gives us the ability to run something when we hover over it. How would we do that? Double click on here. It's going to go. This is going to be on click. We don't want click. What I want is on something called mouse move. Mouse move, right? So when we hover over something, it's going to give us message box test. Okay, so that means when we hover over that, something's going to happen. That's what I want. When I hover over it, something happens. So how do we do that? So now when we get, remember, it's not going to work. Nothing's going to happen while you're in design mode. Nothing at all. Out of design mode by clicking on this, then hovering it, it's going to be test. So let's look at that again. Then hovering over it. So outside of this, so that's how we get something to happen on mouse move of a label. So you see how that works? All right, let's go back into design mode. Design mode allows us to work with the shape. So we must be in design mode to work with it, and then we must be out of design mode to actually get to see how it's going to perform. So that's important. So it's like basically like an edit mode. Okay, so now that you've seen how we, of course we can assign macros on click, right? If we want to assign macro on click, we can do that just as easily back into the developers. And here's the one we just created. We can do message box click. So now when we click it, something's going to happen. So let's get out of design mode again. Now we know on hover, there's going to be a test. And when we click it, there's going to be a test. I can't click it without a hover. So let's get rid of the first one here. We don't need, let's get rid of that mouse move. And now let's just click it. So it's a little bit less confusing. Now when we click it, we see that we have click. Click, okay? So we see that we can assign different macros based on different actions. Back into design mode, click on it, and we're going to delete that. Okay, so you understand. So what I've done with this here is I've assigned macros to hover, which is going to change the color, and I've assigned macros to click. Now basically it's almost the same type of macro, except one is permanent, right? For example, I'm just hovering now, I'm not clicking on anything. When I exit out of it, I don't want those changes to be saved, right? It's on blue. If I'm just hovering, I wanted a temporary. I wanted to give the user an idea of what it'll look like, but we don't want them to commit to those changes. But if they click on it, that means they really want to change those. So when they click, I just clicked on orange. Now the changes are now permanent. So this gives the user ability to preview what the buttons might look like if they click on them, but if they don't commit to changing them, it's not going to change. So when we click on blue, it's going to change back to blue, and it's going to keep those changes. So there's some things going on there. Let's open up this menu here by clicking here. And now what it's going to design mode, this is going to keep that menu open. Remember, when we hover over it, nothing's going to happen because we're now in design mode. Let's take a look. So I've created 7 different ActiveX labels here, and I've given them a name. You want to make sure to name them. These are the properties. You can, of course, see this by clicking on the properties. That's going to show the properties, or so you want to see the properties. Now I've also given them a back style of transparent. When you're working with these, you may want to give it a color, right? So if I were to give it a color, it's much easier to work with them. But in the end, so now we can work with them very, very easily. But of course, we want to work with them. Once we're done with them, we want them transparent. Why do we want them transparent? Because we want something to appear in the back of them, right? This is the shape. This is your standard rectangle shape here. This is a standard rectangle shape here, a square shape here. I've assigned this basically a shape that I've given this format to. And this is basically another shape that I've just white and I put text in there. But on top of that, I've given it this particular ActiveX, right? Now we can see it because I've given it a back color and I've given it back. But as soon as I change this to transparent, it's going to be gone. So keep that in mind. When you're working with these ActiveX, you'll want to change the to opaque or give it some kind of background so it's much easier to work with. It's very hard to work with when it's transparent, but it works great. So the reason we want it transparent is because we want the user to see these buttons below, but we don't want them to see the ActiveX shape, because the ActiveX shapes are there only to control the macros on hover or control the macros on click. So that's why we have those there. So now that we've done that and we change it back to transparent, it gives us that look. So on these specific ActiveX, I want something to happen on hover and I want something to happen on click. These rectangles below, let's see, here's rectangle 100. These are just specific rectangles that show the color. These are only for viewing purposes, button 1. These are all shapes and they're just for the looks. They include the text or they include the colors. So that's all there. They don't have any purpose other than for the viewing purposes. The real action happens with these ActiveX. These 7 ActiveX is where the action happens. For each ActiveX, I have two macros. One is going to on mouse move, which is going to be the hover, and one is on click. So let's take a look at that. When we double click, we're going to see that we have on the sheet code here, we're on Shales code, we have on hover click. On click, we have some action, and we have 7 of those, and we also have some action on mouse move. Remember, I said 2 macros, one based on the mouse movement and one based on the click. So we really want 2, and they're just slightly different. So what I want to do is I want to know what color. Now when we run a macro, we want to know what color. Let's take a look at how we get to those colors in the first place, just so you have an understanding and how we can get to that. So let's go out of design mode and let's record a macro, and let's call it macro 1. And let's say we want to change, let's say we create a new shape and just a basic shape, and I want to know the colors. So I've got a button here, and now what I want to do is I want to get all of these colors. But I don't know what color they are. So I'm going to change it to black, then I'm going to change it to blue, then we're going to change it to red, and so on and so forth. And of course the last one was orange. So now I've recorded a macro, and we're going to stop the macro. And let's take a look at what macro was created. Into module 1, which is just created. Now we created the shape, which is here, which is not too important. And then we changed the increment. That's not too important. So what we've done is actually created style preset. Here's where we get to the shape style preset. These are specific presets based on the color, 36, 38, 39. In fact, it goes all the way to 42. So all I really need to do to get all those is assign a number from 36 to 42 for each of those, black all the way, black, blue, orange, all of them, 36 to 42. I've only done 4 of them, but there's actually 7 total. Okay, so we can remove this macro. We understand the numbers. So again, here we go. The black color 36, the blue color 37, red 38, 39. So we understand how we get these numbers. So all I need to do is differentiate the number, which is based on the color for each one of them. And I want to put that into B23. I want to put that color based on B23. I want to put it right here. Now, we also want to know the existing color. Why do we want to know the existing color? For example, let's say we're here and we change all the colors, right? But the user hasn't clicked. So I need to change them back to blue, right? Because we haven't clicked. We don't know what the user really wants. They're just looking. They're just browsing. They may not want to make a permanent change, but I've got to change them back, right? I got to change it back to blue, right? How do we know? So we want 2 cells. One for the existing color, The existing style is 37 and 1 for the current hover style. So for example, if we change this to red, let's scroll up a little bit. Let's raise this up so we can see those changes. Watch B23 and watch B24. B24 is not going to change, but B23 is going to change as I hover. So we go to red, B23 goes to 38, green 39, purple 40. So you see that? But let's say I must return it back to the existing color because the user has not made a click. All we need to do is copy B24 because we know the existing style is B24 and copy that back into B23 so we know the hover style. So again, if we go out, it goes back to B. You see how that? Watch that again. When I'm clicking red, or not, excuse me, when I'm hovering over red, it changes 38, green, and purple. But now, let's say the user has not clicked it. What I need to do is take that existing style and bring it back into B23. So in other words, I'm going to take the value 37 and put it into B23. And that's going to be on a macro. So as soon as I exit without clicking, it changes. However, if we actually click on something, I'm going to take whatever is in B23 and place it into B24. So we want to make sure that we differentiate between what they're hovering. This is called a temporary color. You can call this temporary color, and this would be called the existing color or the permanent color. So we have two different ones, and when we run macros changing the color, we can change the color based on these two values. And let's show you just how we did that. So we go back into that. So let's take a look at on mouse move. What do I want to do? I want to change B23 to 36, and then I want to run a macro button color change. This macro is going to change all of the colors of our button. So if we right click here and we go into definition, we're going to see that we have a theme menu module, and inside that module we have a macro called button color change. So looking at this specific one, we see that we have a different specific, very simple macro. We're going to define the shape style as long, and we know that B23 contains that style number. Now you see I have one for each of these buttons. Now we could use an array, but the problem is that I don't want to change. These are all groups, right? I need to change I only want to change the individual button inside this group. So when they're grouped like that, they're a little bit harder to work with. So we need to call them out specifically. So I've given each one of them a name. Remember, not this entire group. Let's just take a look at here in the selection pane so we understand. Not the entire group. We want the specific button in the group. I only want to change this add button. I only want to change this specific. Let's take a look at the one we selected just now, the clear button. So that's the individual shape inside the group. So to do that, we need to call them out specifically, each one of them. So I've done just that. Shapes, print shape style equals shape style. All that does is it assigns that number. So this is very simple. So for each button in our specific sheet, I've called it out and just given it this shape now. Now we could do, of course, with every shape based on a certain style. In other words, you could run a loop through your worksheet, but it was a little bit slow. Or you run a loop through all the shapes in your worksheet, and then you determine if it's a specific shape, then you can color. I tried that too, but this is a little bit more specific and a little bit more clear. So I wanted to do this, and it's also faster. So all we're doing here is basically assigning each shape a specific color. Great. So that's nice. So now we know how to do that. But how do we differentiate between permanent and hover? So let's take a look at that. So we know that B23. So back into the sheet, we just went over this, B23. So we know how as soon as B23 changes, and we do the same thing for each color. This is on mouse move, meaning hover. But what about if the user clicks? Well, if we scroll up here, we see that there's 7 macros based on the click. So and there's only really two differentiations, I should say, two differentiations. One, I'm going to change the color below B23 and B24 to the color, and I also want to hide the menu. I want to run a macro hiding the menu. So that way, when the user clicks on it, as I showed you before, when we actually make a click, both B24 and B23 change to the number. This way it becomes permanent because we use this color here. So let's look into that in the hide macro just as we showed you here. So what about this hide macro? So we run the button color change and then we hide the macro, and this is going to make the difference. So for example, if I go to black, if I hover over black and I hide the menu, I want it to go back to red. If I hover over blue, but I don't click on blue and I hide the menu, we're going to go over how to hide it in just a moment, so don't worry. But when we hide it, I want to go back unless the user has actually made a claim. So how do we hide it? How do we get that hide? As soon as we leave this, you'll notice the cursor leaves it, it hides. How do we do that? Well, again, let's go back into the developers and go back into design. We've used another label here. So let's take a look at this. Oh, we have to actually go out of design. I want to actually display this specific. Now we can go back into the developers and click design. Now we have everything displayed. And if we take a look here, let's bring this over a little bit so we can see it. If we take a look at this group here, let's look at our group here. We have something called outside hover here, outside hover right here. And it's basically this ActiveX shape. This is another ActiveX label. And if you'll notice that this is bigger, it's bigger. Let's change the background of this so you can see it's right now it's transparent. So let's go into the properties and change it from transparent to opaque. So now you can see it. And if we change the color a little bit, it's white. So you can see, just change it to a different color. Okay, so now you see if the user hovers over this, and you notice it's behind, that's very important. This outside is behind the menu. So when it's behind the menu and we hover over everything here, it's not going to affect it. But as soon as we leave this menu, the cursor leaves the menu and hovers over this, something happens. Well, what happens? When we double click this label here and we go into that, we'll see that we have something called outside hover mouse move. So when we move over that, the mouse moves over this outside menu, we're running a macro. The macro is called hide menu. So when we right click that, highlight it, and go into the definition, we're going to see also in the theme menu, we have something called hide menu here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to define the shape sheet menu. We want to hide that. So that entire group is now false. What is that? Just for reference, that's this entire group here. Let's keep that green just so you can see it, get an idea of it. We're going to keep it non-transparent just so you can see it. Into the developers, get out of the design mode. And now when we click here, so when we click here, right, and we highlight, there's nothing's going to happen here except the colors change. But as soon as we exit and we hover over this, it's going to run a macro. That macro now hides it. You see that? As soon as we hide, if we go drop down, hides it. If we go to the right, hides it. So that macro runs as soon as we hover over that green shape there. In fact, normally it's transparent. So how do we do that? Well, that's just a macro called hide menu. So the first thing it does is it hides that big group, the theme menu. That's the first thing it does. This group here, remember, I've given it this name. Let's see if I can right click it, go into the developers, design mode, not yet, developers, out of design mode. Display it, then go into the developers, then design. That gives us the ability. So I've given this, remember, I've given this entire name called theme menu. Theme menu is the name that I've given to it. I want that hidden as soon as they hover over it. So we have that. What else is in there? Now what I want to do is I want to check, is it a permanent change or not? If B24 does not equal B23, then it's a temporary change. That means that it's a temporary change. That means they're just hovering over it. They didn't intend to change it. They just wanted to see it. In that case, what I want to do, I want to return B23 back to whatever it is in B24. Return it back to the existing color. I want to change it back to the existing value. Then I want to run the button color change. I want to run it so that we can return it back to whatever the user had changed. Again, so we do that. So let's go back and get out of the design mode and go back through that macro again. So when they hover over it, when they hover over blue, we have not clicked on blue, so we need to return it back to whatever original color. So as we exit out, it hides the menu and returns it back to its original color, just like that. All right, so this macro does it. This macro will return it back to its original color. Of course, if they're the same, if B23 and B24 are the same, this macro won't run. It won't run because this macro will only run if they're not equal. So for example, if the user has actually intended to click on blue and we exit out of them, well, actually we're going to exit out, but we also hide it on exit. So when we click on it, we also want the menu to disappear. How does that happen? Well, that happens right here. Back in the sales order, here when they actually click, right, when they're actually clicking on that, the click, we're actually hiding the menu. Remember, when they make the click, when they make an actual click, we're also going to hide the menu, but we don't want to hide it on hover. When the mouse moves, we're not hiding it, right? We're just changing the color, but we're not hiding it. So that's another difference. That's the other difference. So that is how we are able to change the themes simply by hovering over and having permanent changes when they actually make a click. All right, so let's change this back to that. Again, you want to display your pop-up. We want to go into the developer, go into the design mode, click on this specific, not on the group, but on the specific label, and change it. Well, I like to change it to white. Then I want it to go back. Then I wanted to change it to opaque to transparent. Now it's transparent. So now you have that hidden pop-up menu. And remember, we need to go out of design mode if it's not already in. Now we can see we've got the nice, and when we click on it, it changes it automatically. All right, great. I'm so happy I got to show you that. So now we've covered the print. We've covered how to change themes. We can remove that now. And also there's another thing. Now you notice this pop-up calendar icon. I want to show you how we get that only on specific cells that contain a date format. This is a great feature and allows you to display a calendar for only those with the date format. As I showed you before, as soon as you format a specific cell as a date, it's going to automatically do it. It's just really a nice feature. But how do we do that? Well, we do that through a specific macro on selection change, right? On selection change. Now, if you've been following my videos before, you probably see these videos. We can actually change this to the top. We don't want it to bring to the front, so it's going to show above those pictures. All right, so how do we get this to show up only on specific cells that contain a date formatted field? And this is based on multiple different formats, which is a really nice feature. Well, the idea is each one has a format. So of course, sometime we're going to do something on selection change. Now I have an icon here, and I've named that icon called Calend icon, CAL icon. So that's important. I want to show that, but I only want to show it when the user clicks a date field. How do we do that? All right, back into the developers, into Visual Basic and selection change. We're going to be focusing on selection change. So again, down here, this is worksheet change. We're not focused on that. We're focused on selection change. This is the one we want to focus on. And also, if you've seen these, this is the calendar that I created a few years ago. And it's basically a shape-based calendar. So it's a really cool calendar that you can use. If you haven't seen it before, let's just show you real quick. It gives you the ability to change not only the date, and it gives you the ability to change the color of the calendar just by clicking here. So you can choose different calendar colors as well as themes, just like you can. So it really gives the user a lot of flexibility with this calendar. And I've had videos specifically on it before, so I think you'll really like it. And this gives us previously what we've had is as soon as we select on a field, it pops up, but users may want to enter dates manually. If they don't, they give the flexibility of adding a calendar, which is really a nice feature. Okay, so how do we get this icon to show up only on dates? Now, how do we do that? Well, let me show you how. Into the code under selection change. And if we look starting down here, we want to do this. I want to determine if it's a date format, and if it's a date format, then I wanted to show it. But the problem is, one of the issues is there's many different date formats. What is a date format? Well, if we go into home, we see it's date format, but that doesn't really help us because there's so many possible date formats. So if we go into more number formats, and here we look at the date, we know it's a date, we see 326. But if we look in here, it's MM. But what if it's a different date format? There's so many date formats. Look at all these date formats. You could have a lot. You can have 4 or 5 different date formats just in your worksheet. But I want to do it for every date format. And I want to give you, the programmer, the ability to have this calendar appear with different date formats. So what I want to do is I want to run a check. I want to check if it's any of date formats you specify as the developer, then show this calendar. If it's not, then don't. So how do we do that? Well, we use an array and we loop through that array. So I'm going to create date formats as a variant. and the cell format as a variant as well. And also the date formats are going to equal an array. Now here is where you put in all of the date formats. You can put in as many as you want. Put in all those different types of date formats that may or may not be. Of course, you can see those into that, just what I showed you, those date formats. Add as many date formats as you want here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looping through those. We're going to use a for each loop. And so for each, based on the target, which is the cell that you selected. Remember, we're in selection change. So this is going to run a check. If the target, the number format, if this cell format equals one of those number formats, equals this, this, or this, then do what? Then run this macro. And I'll show you this macro in just a moment. What that's going to do is it's going to display the calendar icon. And then I'll also want to end. Why do we have end here? Because as soon as it's found, if it's found, I want to end. I don't want to continue to loop through these different date formats. If it's found, we just want to display it and then end out. We're good. Once it's found, we don't need to continue through that loop. Otherwise, what if it's not found? If it's not found, then what I want to do is I don't want to show, I want to make sure that that shape is hidden wherever it might be, that calendar icon. And I also want to hide the calendar. This is a macro that hides the actual calendar. So for example, let's say we have both of these are displayed. What if user selects a cell that does not contain the format? I want to hide both of those. I want to hide both this calendar icon and I want to hide the calendar itself. Selecting anything else will. But what if it is? What if it is? In that case, I want to display it as well. When they click it, I want to display it wherever it's displayed, which would be here. So that gives the user the ability to show the specific calendar right under the specified cell. All right, so let's get into those macros and see just how we do it. How do we get this icon to display in the specific cell? It's one icon. We have just one icon, but its location is variable. Again, a variable button, a dynamic location as well. So how do we get that there? Let's go into the macro, back into the VBA. I want to show you this specific macro and how we get that icon to show. So when we right click that, I'm going to click on the definition, which will get us, and we have the button macros. Here we have the show calendar icon. Basically, it's a very simple macro. We're going to, with sheet 1 and this specific shape calendar icon, that's that little icon that I showed you about. We're going to be working with that, and we're going to do 5 different things with that. The first thing I want to do is I want to display it on the left of the active cell, offset 0,1. What is that? Well, offset, what I want, we're focused on the active cell. What is the active cell? We'll see whatever we've displayed, which would be, in this case, would be H11. So what I want to do is I actually want to display this icon one column over. I actually want to display it in column I, but I want to move it over to the left. What that's going to do is it's going to bring that icon just to the left. So if we move it about, let's say 18 or 17 pixels to the left, it's always going to be on it. And the reason we do that is if this increases a lot, again, when we select out of it, I also want it to display on the left. That way, regardless of the width of the column, it's always going to be in the leftmost place of that. So that's really great. So as soon as we change it, it's always going to be on the right side, or the inside the left border, or on the right side of this cell automatically. So how do we do that? Well, we can do that with so we're going to display it offset. Offset means some other location other than the cell you selected. Offset, this first part would be the row offset. Well, I don't want it on a different row. I want it on a different column. So the row offset is going to be 0. -1 would be 1 row up. +1 would be 1 row down. The next one is the column. I want it 1 column to the right, so that's going to be 1. If it was going to be 1 column to the left, it would be -1. So this is going to place it 1 column to the right. Now that's not good enough. 1 column to the right without increments going to put it just, so if we don't bring it back to the left, if we comment this out, we're going to see where it displays. It's going to be displayed to the right. I really don't want it there, right on the column. I want to bring it more to the left, 18 pixels to the left to be exact. So we use it increment left to do just that. Increment left will bring it back to the left, increment. And I also don't want it exactly on the top. I want it just maybe 1 pixel down from the top. It's going to hug that top too much. So just 1 pixel down. So when we increment that, you're going to see it's going to display right where we want it. Okay, and then the last step, of course, I want to make it visible. It's currently hidden, so it'll be First, we want to place it, then we want to display it. Once it's placed, I want to display it using visible equals MSOC true. That's going to display it. And we've also assigned a macro to this. So that's great. That's how we get the icon, but how do we get the calendar to display when we click it? Well, we can do that just with a macro. If we right click that and we click assign macro, we're going to see that that's been assigned to a macro called calendar show right here. So if we edit that, it's going to go into the VBA and that's going to show our calendar. This is a macro that I've gone through before. Basically, this macro is going to display this calendar and it's going to base the date. This is a little bit complex. There's no need to get into this time. We've got specific videos on this, but this is a feature. You can just use this. You can basically take this entire module and just drag it into your project and you'll have everything. Basically, all this does is it places the specific calendar, it sets the calendar, and it's all based on a hidden sheet. Just I'm going to unhide a sheet. It's off the screen. I'm going to unhide calendar pop-up. It's all based on this sheet here. This is a backup calendar, and this is a calendar that I created, so it's based on these dates. But this stays hidden. Just so you know, this sheet gets created automatically. So when you want to import this calendar into your own projects, there's just a few things you need to do. Basically, what you want to do is, from my sheet, all you need to do is copy this calendar, copy the calendar. When you see it, just copy it into your own sheet. Just right click here and copy that calendar, paste into your own sheet. And then you want to do one more thing. You also want to take that module and place it into you want to take this module here and drag it into your own project. So that's going to bring it. And then once you do that, then all you need to do is set when and where you want to display that calendar based on a certain selection change. So everything else, this code will help you in case the calendar gets removed. It's going to undo that. So that helps too. That's why we have a backup calendar. But basically, this training, we're not going to focus on that calendar. I just wanted to focus on the dynamic buttons. So let's go over what you have learned today. We have learned how the ability to create dynamic print copies by selecting specific numbers. We've also learned how to create a list of printers based on your computer and how to create a dynamic list and how to show that list based on a drop down arrow. And we showed how to hide that simply by moving it over, hovering it over a data validation. It's going to make it look like it's appearing just based on this specific button click. And we've also learned how to display those buttons using a specific formula that we can display and display that text inside a button, a dynamic text inside a button. We have also learned how to change the theme, how to change the colors of all button, and using specific ActiveX labels on hover and click, how we can differentiate between those and change the look and feel of your program. And we've learned how to unhide and hide the group based on hovering over a hidden type of label here. And lastly, of course, we've learned how to display buttons based on specific formats of cells and other formats not. All right, it's been a great training. Dynamic buttons is what we're calling it. I hope you have liked and enjoyed it. If you have, please go ahead and subscribe. I bring these videos to you each and every Tuesday, so I really appreciate all your support. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.